of 1 Samuel, going through it section by section this fall, all the way through Christmas. We're following along with God's work through his people, raising up a new prophet in Samuel and who will anoint a new king. 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to read through chapter 2, verse 11. If you have a Bible, you can open it there to follow along, because during the sermon we're also going to continue to look back at what we're reading here together. I'll get out of the way here. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 21. And when Hannah's husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always." "Do what seems best to you," her husband Elkanah told her. "Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word." So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, "Pardon me, my lord. As surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And he worshipped the Lord there. Then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord my horn is lifted up. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. The bows of the warrior are broken, but those who are stumbled are armed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food. Those who are hungry no more. She who is barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. On them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful servants, but the wicked will be silenced in the place of darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. Have you ever wondered, how much does God actually require of you? How much time and energy? What kind of commitment? How much of your life should be given over in service to God? Are there certain parts of your life, certain aspects of your schedule? On the other hand, are some people expected to give all of themselves over to God, like pastors or missionaries, while other people are only expected to give a portion of their life over to God, keeping the rest for themselves, their family, career, personal interests, whatever? How much does God actually require of you? Not too long ago, a man attended our church, and I greeted him at the door, and I said, "What's your name? How'd you get here? What's going on with your life?" And he said, "I grew up in church. I stopped going for a long time, but then I started feeling convicted, feeling compelled to come back to church, and someone at work was encouraging me to do so and encouraging me in my faith." And I said, "That's great. I'm so glad that you're here. I hope you're encouraged being with us today. Hope you can grow in your faith in this worship service. But how do you feel about all this new change and pursuit you have?" And he said, I'm both excited and scared." Can you sympathize with that tension? I'm excited, but I'm also scared. And I didn't let him explain at all his own feelings, and I should have, but I just said, "You're exactly right to feel that way. Because it is exciting to know that there's a God who exists over your life, and he's taken notice of you, and he's reminded you of himself again. That's very exciting to know someone's taken notice of you and is calling you into a new purpose. But it's also terrifying knowing who this one is. Because it is God who exists over all, he can ask anything of you. That's what's so scary sometimes about following God. And this is our fear. If I give myself over to God, he might ask me to give up everything for him. I believe the purpose of our passage today for God's people throughout history has been to show us that that's exactly right. Everyone is called to give all of themselves over to God. For our entire lives are meant to be a display of worship to him. And yet, our passage also shows us that there's no better place to be. There's no better king to serve. For as Hannah's prayer tells us, he is the God of great reversals. Look back at verses 4 and 5 for a quick snapshot at this. She says, the bows of the warrior are broken, and those who stumbled, probably those who are being looked at by the archer, they're stumbling. They're ready to be shot. Those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full are now hiring themselves out just to eat. But those who were hungry are hungry no more. And we can't help but think Hannah's talking about herself in this next part. She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. Remember that conflict last week between Hannah and Peninnah? God is the God of great reversals, and this means that for those who give themselves wholly over to him, they will receive back more than they could have ever given. Our passage this morning is about how young Samuel's life is dedicated in worship to God, and we will see throughout the rest of the book of Samuel this fall how God uses this single dedicated life to turn the fortune of the entire nation of Israel. This is how our God works. He is the God of great reversals. And by the greatest reversal of all he promises, he will turn the fortune of all creation through his appointed king. You and I are invited today to get swept up in this great reversal story by dedicating our lives over to God in worship. That's the main idea for this morning, that because the Lord is the God of great reversals, we can give our lives over to him in worship. So first, what is worship? We saw a lot in our passage. We saw Elkanah offering sacrifices to the temple. We saw Hannah break out in song, praising God for who he is. We saw young Samuel serving as a servant to the priest in the tabernacle. Elkanah was a faithful father, providing for his family and leading his family in worship. Hannah singing songs about God's goodness and grace and his sovereign power, which is worship. In popular Christian culture today, music, what we did when we were singing songs, basically has become synonymous with the term worship. If someone were to ask you later today, how was worship today? They're probably asking you, how was the music? We also see Samuel, though, at the end of our passage, newly enlisted in the priestly service under Eli. Our last verse, verse 11, says he ministered before the Lord. I wonder if this was worship, serving in full-time ministry, helping God's people know their God and grow under grace. But you know, there was actually one place where the word worship was used in our passage. It's in verse 28. I think this is the main verse, a key verse for our entire passage. Hannah said to Eli, now I give Samuel to the Lord, for his whole life will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Now, the word used for worship here most simply refers to bowing down before someone out of respect or in worship to the Lord. Samuel may have done that. He may very well have bowed before Eli in this moment. But the way the author is using this word also reflects what is happening here. It reflects the moment itself, Samuel's entire life being given over to the Lord. That is, to do whatever the Lord would have him to do. And in the broadest sense of the word, this is what worship means, to glorify God with your life. To live a life of worship means to glorify God in all that you do. The other day, I was invited to go to a natural bodybuilding competition. And I happen to be a fan. of bodybuilding. Not that I'm trying to become a bodybuilder, but happened to be a fan. It was the son of one of my friends, and so I wanted to go see the show. It was at Barnstable High School. Now, the grandmother was sitting with me. She had never seen anything like this in her entire life. At every quarter turn her grandson made on stage, she oohed and awed very loudly for everyone to hear. And she said, geez, looking at all these people makes me want to starve myself because of how shredded they were, how much muscle you could see. She was exactly right. You have to starve yourself to lose all that fat, to display all that muscle. You even have to dehydrate yourself so that your skin can get as tight and grainy as possible just before the show. Bodybuilders are not good friends to have because their entire life is dedicated toward this. Everything that they do, even how much they sleep, it's all calculated, especially leading up to a show. Everyone around you will want you to do something or eat something, but everything that you desire or that other people desire for you is subjected to this criteria. Whether or not it will work toward your goal of displaying your physique in the upcoming competition. This is what it means to worship God with your life, to live for God's glory. Everything you do, as well as everything that everyone around you wants you to do, is subjected to the criteria of whether or not it will work toward your goal of displaying God's glory in your life to the watching world. We display God's glory in our life by obeying his commands, by loving what he loves, by relying on his strength and not our own, by remembering our gratitude for his grace and kindness in our life. And this kind of life of worship very well may look like Elkanah, look like a father bringing his family to church with an offering in hand. And very well may look like a mother singing a song about God's glory and grace displayed through her children. Or it might look like Samuel, a person's life being dedicated into full-time ministry to help people, God's people know him more and grow under his grace. But this also then means that worship cannot be shrunken down to any one of these things. Worship cannot be shrunken down to musical expression. Worship cannot be limited to you offering something to support the church. Worship can also not be compartmentalized in your service to the church, volunteering for something. The Apostle Paul, writing to the church of Rome, says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Offer your life as a living sacrifice. How does he summarize it or describe it? He says, this is your true and proper worship. In other words, your entire life is meant to display God's glory as worship, which is why Paul can say other things like this, whether you eat or whether you drink, do all to the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31. This is where we get it wrong. We sometimes think that we can simply just bring our annual sacrifice to the Lord and that be sufficient. Creasters, Christmas and Easter attenders, even in our own regular rhythm of coming to church, we think, oh, I ought to go to church today to bring my sacrifice to God. Other times we think we can serve in church. Oh, I'll sign up and volunteer and help out. That will be sufficient. That'll check off the worship box in my life. But these things are not in themselves worship, but rather expressions that are flowing out of a heart of worship from a whole life that has been dedicated to God. And we know this is true. We know this is how worship works, because this is always why things went wrong for God's people. This is always why things went wrong for God's people. Whenever they held themselves back in some way or tried to compartmentalize the worship of their life. At the entrance of the promised land, Moses was begging the Israelites to give themselves to God with this kind of life worship. He says, if only you would love him with your whole heart. The Israelites did not. They did not dedicate themselves wholly to the Lord, and this was the cause of their downfall and the cause of the despair that Hannah's even living in at this time. Their hearts were swayed to worship false gods and hope in earthly hopes. As we continue on in 1 Samuel, we will find this to be the most significant difference between King Saul and King David. King Saul, Israel's first king, King David's the second king. Saul's heart was divided. He sometimes earnestly desired to please God by following after the prophetic word of Samuel, but other times he went his own way. He added his own ideas. Sometimes he didn't agree with the way God wanted to do something, and so he mixed it up. But David's heart was dedicated to worship God. He prayed for God's help in this. He prays, we read it in Psalm 86, "Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name." See that imagery there? My heart is scattered in a million directions. God, would you unite my heart that I might fear your name? And the Lord recognized this in David. He answered this prayer, calling David, he said, a man after my own heart. The call of our passage is right in line with what Jesus says as the summary of the law. Love the Lord our God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Now, can we really do this? This is scary. This is a big ask. We might wonder, if I completely give myself over to God, I'll lose everything. I'll lose all that I hold dear. Don't you think Hannah felt that way, giving up her only son? Hannah did have the opportunity to hold Samuel back from the Lord. She had the wiggle room. It was only when the son was weaned that she would bring him, and that could have lasted 3 to 5 years. Some commentators say that could have lasted up to 12 years when he would be fit to be of any usefulness to Eli. And so when Elkanah first goes up, she actually stays back. But she kept her vow eventually with the encouragement of her husband and told Eli the priest, "As surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord." In other words, I can't hide it. I can't take the chance of holding him back. Surely as you live, I am the one. But imagine if Hannah kept Samuel back for herself. Imagine if she did what so many other barren women did who eventually had a son. Imagine if she kept Samuel back for herself, the temptation we all would have in her shoes. What would become of the nation of Israel under the leadership of Hophni and Phinehas? We'll read that passage next week and find out what kind of, the translation is scoundrels, that they were. And imagine if David followed in the footsteps of Saul with a divided heart. Would God have ever used him to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines? Jump ahead to the Gospels. Imagine if Jesus took Satan up on that offer to receive command of all the kingdoms of the world, if only to bow and worship him. What would have happened to Hannah, to David, and to Jesus if they didn't give themselves over to God completely? They would have actually lost everything if they did that. Do you see the irony in this? They would have lost everything if they did not give up everything to worship God in their life. And what was the result? They gained it all back. They gained it all back even more, as the narrative of 1 Samuel will show us in Hannah's life. What was a loss to Hannah was a gain for Israel, receiving a righteous and a faithful prophet. Now, why does it work this way? Why does, when we lose everything to follow God, and we give up everything, that we actually don't lose really much at all? It'd be the opposite. If we held something back, we would lose it all. Why does it work like this? Well, because God is the God of great reversals. He's the God of great reversals, as Hannah sings. And this is why he is worthy of the worship of our lives. Now, although the card game Uno is not making a comeback this year, Uno reverse cards are. I don't know if you've had a child pull out an Uno reverse card on you, but I did recently. This is a thing. I had to look it up. Kids in school are using Uno reverse cards as a way to make a comeback from being made fun of, so if they can reverse it back on their bully. And I recently had an Uno reverse card played on me. Not that I was being a bully to a kid. He was a first grader. I was driving one morning as a substitute school bus driver in the town of Sandwich. as I do from time to time. He was getting a little too squirrely in the back seat. It was not safe. I didn't want him to fall down and get hurt, especially if I made a turn or made a quick stop. You need to sit in your seat. And he pulled out an Uno reverse card on me. He said, I have an Uno reverse card. I don't know what he expected of that, if he wanted me to come sit in the back and him to ride up front or what. And I just laughed. This was so funny to me. He keeps talking with the kids and pulling out more reverse cards. He had 4 Uno reverse cards on that bus ride. He was prepared for the day to put back the momentum coming his way, to turn the events, to turn his fortune. And Hannah's song praises God as this God of great reversals, as if he were an undefeatable Uno player with an infinite number of reverse cards. Some of the contrasts from her song: the strong are reversed with the weak. The full are reversed with those who are hungry. The barren are reversed with those who are fertile. The dead are reversed to those who are alive. The sick with those who are well. The poor with those who are rich. The humble with those who are exalted. Those are Hannah's categories. Hannah was singing this based on her own experience. In the previous passage, we saw her rival Peninnah boasting about her children and mocking Hannah for being barren. And yet the Lord would turn the momentum by remembering Hannah, opening her womb, and providing her a son. What's more, we'll read next Sunday's passage how the Lord provided her actually with 5 more children after Samuel. But this great reversal will not turn out to be much more than merely providing a barren wife with children, for through Samuel, her miracle child, the Lord will carry out another great reversal. 2 reversals for the price of 1. As the prestigious priestly house of Eli falls suddenly and decisively, leaving a young Samuel from a commoner's household to become the last judge of Israel and the greatest priest in all her history. Samuel would be the linchpin to transition the nation of Israel from a tribal community to a monarchy. He will be the kingmaker for Israel, anointing the first and second kings of Israel. Yet more great reversals are to come, beginning with Hannah, then to Samuel, and again through a king that Samuel would anoint, David, a young shepherd boy, the youngest of 8 sons. He will become the next and greatest king of Israel's history, defeating the mighty Goliath while he was still too young to even enlist an Israelite army. Truly, the Lord is the God of great reversals. We cannot get through a page of Scripture without seeing this. God is able to bring about such great reversals because, first, he is sovereign. Look back at verse 2. Chapter 2, verse 2 of Hannah's song. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. The Lord is worthy of our worship because there is no one else in competition with him. He is set apart. He's in a league of his own with no other rival who can offer you the kind of security and redemption he can. There is no rock like our God. Verse 6, the Lord brings death and he makes alive. He brings down to the grave, he raises up. Verse 7, the Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. The very foundations of the Lord are laid by him, as it says in the end of verse 8. The Lord is sovereign. He holds the life and breath of everyone and everything in his hands. By his benevolent grace, he continues to give us our life and breath and many other things in life to enjoy according to his common grace, regardless of whether or not we pay any attention to him. Why is the Lord worthy of the worship of our life? Because without his ever-present grace, we wouldn't have our life at all. And yet, this is only the half of it. God is able to bring about such great reversals because he exists as sovereign king over all creation, and he delights to do so because he is good and kind. We see this in verses 4 and 5. The bows of the warriors are broken, but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food, but those who are hungry no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away. Verse 8, he raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. Now, if God were only sovereign and all-powerful, he would not necessarily be worthy of the worship of our life. Because what if he were not good? If he were an all-powerful yet evil king, he would not be worthy of anyone's worship. But he is good. He is kind. He is gentle towards the humble and the needy. In fact, he leverages his sovereign power and authority to lift up the needy. He demonstrated this in Hannah's life, and he will demonstrate it in King David's life. The Lord will demonstrate this time and time again, and it is through his sovereign power that God empowers us to live for his glory. Now, along with all of these great attributes of God that we're seeing displayed in the passage, there is warnings that we should not neglect either in light of all of this. Do not neglect the warnings embedded within Hannah's song, verse 3. Do not keep talking so proudly or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. Verses 9 and 10, he will guard the feet of his faithful servants, but the wicked will be silenced in the place of darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. So what is it that gets us in the way, or we get in our own way, of worshiping the Lord with our lives? In pride, trying to prevail in life according to human strength. Trying to live life without reference to God, as if we could take him or leave him. As if we could hire him out and consult him with an offering, or if we could compartmentalize him in our life just by serving every once in a while in church. Although God holds our life and our breath in his hands, and he has graciously given us everything we have, we so often fail to acknowledge his presence over us. What's more, we're so quick to credit ourselves with our fortune in life. If you stand in pride before this great king, you will be brought down by his justice. Because it is wrong to stand in such defiance of him after he has done so much. But if you humble yourself before him, you will be lifted up by his mercy and grace. In fact, I guarantee that regardless of where you've been in life, regardless of what you've done in life, if you humble yourself before him, he will lift you up by his mercy and grace. Because God the Father, here's why I can guarantee that, because God the Father raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And let me explain that a little bit. Right around 1,000 years would go by after King David's day. The Israelite people will find themselves in a very similar circumstance as they are here in 1 Samuel, in Hannah's day. In Hannah's day, they were weary from being beaten down by the Philistines around them. In Mary's day, the mother of Jesus, it would be the Romans. In Hannah's day, they were in desperate need for a leader to unite their nation and deliver them. In Mary's day, the same would be true. So when an angel appears to Mary to announce that she was favored by God and chosen to bear the Messiah, Mary responds in worship just as Hannah did. Now, Hannah probably did not recognize or realize the significance of all that she was saying, especially at the end of verse 10, when she says that the Lord would give strength to his king and exalt his anointed. But such is the significance and the nature of divine inspiration. And the Holy Spirit carries along apostles and prophets to speak his word. Because this is exactly how God's people in the first century, in Mary's day, interpreted Hannah's song. These were prophetic references, they believed, about another king that was still to come even after David. A greater king, the Messiah, the anointed one, Jesus Christ. And in Jesus Christ, God would display the greatest reversal of all time, his greatest reversal yet. For Jesus' life would look like anything but triumph and glory. He was actually lowly. He was unattractive. Literally, nothing to look at. And although he was God's anointed king, he would be despised and rejected by God's own people, mocked during his trial and crucified on a cross. But God, according to his perfect plan, raised him from the dead in radiant glory, where he appeared to many people over the course of 30 days, and afterward ascended into heaven, where he is seated at the Father's right hand to reign as king over all. This is the greatest reversal, and this greatest reversal is all about God reconciling people like you and me back to himself. God reveals himself to us as a sovereign deliverer in order to wake us up from our spiritual slumber, that we might live our lives for his glory. So just to consider some application. If all this is true, then how can we worship God with our lives? What would that look like in your life today? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Elkanah was worshiping God with his life as a faithful father, providing for his family and leading his family in worship every year. Fathers, this is your job. This is your number one job description. Lead your family in worship. Just as much as Samuel was living a life of worship in the tabernacle, Elkanah was living a life of worship. Whatever he was doing back home, whatever his common job was, he was faithful to provide for his family and to lead his family in worship. Similarly, Hannah lived a life of worship, reflecting on who God was, reflecting on the goodness of God and praising him for it, reminding her own soul when she was in weary places of who God is. Samuel lived a life of service to the priest, and later he lived as a priest as well. There are many different ways we might express living lives of worship. One thing I couldn't help, I couldn't shake from my mind as an application, looking at Elkanah and Hannah, is simply that parents, if you have children, your children do not belong to you. Your children do not belong to you. They belong to the Lord. The Lord has uniquely lent them to you, which is actually a Hebrew play on words for the name Samuel. He was lent. And your raising them well is an act of worship to God. Raising them intentionally is an act of worship. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 5, don't exasperate your children, fathers. What is he saying? Don't frustrate them. Don't frustrate your children trying to impose your own will on their lives as if they are your own and not someone else's. God is the Lord over their life, and you should be curious to find out what God's will for their life might actually be, rather than trying to impose your own will on their life. What greater way could we frustrate our children as we raise them? Now, I have to think about more generally, those of you who don't have children, or your children are grown and now perhaps taking care of you in some ways, or what has God called you to do? We can think more generally. What has God called you to do? What job do you have? What neighbors live around you? What abilities do you have? What time do you have? Prioritize your life in such a way that your life reflects to the watching world that you are a person who lives for God's glory. Everyone in this passage had their position and their role and their calling before the Lord. What has God called you to do and to be? Don't think it is a lesser thing than something that I might do as a pastor in terms of living a life of worship to God. Whatever it is, do it well. You do it before the Lord. Do it for his glory. Your entire life is meant to be lived in worship to God. Now here's one disclaimer as I close. Living your life for God's glory, if you're really looking out for how has God called me to live and what kind of person he's called me to be, if you do that, it will not make sense to the watching world. It will not make sense in a world where mankind is the center of everything and not God. Giving up your firstborn son to live a life in the priesthood seems insane. Crowning a young shepherd boy as king seems silly. When you live your life in simple and humble ways according to things that would glorify God, you may find yourself even disadvantaged at times compared to the way the world around you does things. You may even be ridiculed and mocked, or at least questioned. Why are you doing things the way you're doing? Why are you doing this on Sunday? Remember, you serve a God of great reversals, and he will not leave you high and dry. The one who reigns over all is the God of great reversals, which is why when we give our lives over to him, dedicating our lives as worship, we will be raised up and we will be vindicated in the end with Jesus. Truly, he will guard the feet of his faithful servants as they rest under the rule and reign of his anointed king. Let's take a brief moment now to reflect on this in prayer. Is there a way we've been trying to keep our lives back from God, back from having him rule and reign over us? Is there a certain aspect of the life we're holding back? What has God called you to do and to be? How can you do those things for his glory? Let's just take a brief moment to pray and reflect on this call.